You've been in a conversation where, in a split second, you were physically present but completely gone. You felt everything they were saying, but your mind just checked out. This isn't shyness. This is the INFJ's emergency shutdown from a subtle psychological attack. I'm going to expose the 8 invisible triggers that force this shutdown. If you are an INFJ, this is your defensive playbook. If you know one, this is your warning. Most people are unaware that they're doing this. They think they're just having a regular interaction, being assertive, or trying to help. But to an INFJ, certain behaviors don't just feel uncomfortable, they feel like someone's trying to rewire their brain against their will. What you're about to discover will transform your understanding of human connection. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you are looking to achieve a deeper understanding of yourself and your personality type, click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. Trigger 1. The Authenticity Detector Alarm. Let's start with the big one. INFJs have a built-in authenticity radar that's constantly scanning for fake behavior. When you put on an act, say things you don't mean, or pretend to be someone you're not to impress them, they immediately sense something's off. You know that feeling when you watch a movie with terrible acting and you can't help but cringe? That's what it's like for an INFJ when they encounter inauthentic behavior, except it's happening in real life, and they can't just change the channel. Here's what really gets to them. When you try to be fake around an INFJ, they start to feel like you think they're stupid. INFJs value intelligence and depth. When you try to pull the wool over their eyes, it feels disrespectful. It's as if you're assuming they won't notice, which, frankly, is insulting to someone who notices everything. The INFJ response is strategic withdrawal. They don't usually call you out directly. Instead, they start pulling back, becoming less available, less engaged. They're protecting themselves from what feels like emotional manipulation. Once they detect fake behavior, they question everything about the interaction. Trigger 2. The Control Trap. Nothing makes an INFJ feel more suffocated than someone trying to control or micromanage them. This is where we enter real mind control territory that they absolutely cannot tolerate. INFJs need autonomy as much as they need air to breathe. They've spent their whole lives developing their own unique perspective on the world, their own moral compass, their own way of doing things. When someone comes in and tries to dictate precisely how they should think, feel, or behave, it feels like an assault on their identity. Here's the thing about INFJs. They're natural perfectionists who hold themselves to incredibly high standards. They don't need external pressure to do good work. They're already putting more pressure on themselves than anyone else ever could. When you try to control them, you're essentially telling them that their internal guidance system isn't good enough. This creates a psychological trap. The more you try to control an INFJ, the more they resist. It's not because they're stubborn or difficult. It's because they're protecting their sense of self. When an INFJ feels controlled, they start to question the entire relationship. They're thinking, if this person doesn't trust me to make my own decisions, do they really know me at all? Trigger 3. Emotional Manipulation Minefield. INFJs have a complicated relationship with emotions. They're incredibly emotionally intelligent and can read people like open books, but they're also deeply empathetic, which means they feel other people's emotions almost as intensely as their own. This empathy is both their superpower and their Achilles heel. INFJs are often targeted by manipulative people precisely because they're so caring and responsive to emotional needs. The manipulator starts using this caring nature against them. They might use guilt trips, such as, "I can't believe you're not supporting me right now when I need you most." They might use emotional blackmail or play the victim card with, You're the only one who understands me. What makes this particularly toxic for INFJs is that they can sense the manipulation, but they also genuinely care about the person's well-being. They're caught between their intuition, which tells them something's wrong, and their heart, which tells them to help. It's like being trapped in emotional quicksand. The more they struggle to help, the deeper they sink. The worst part is that INFJs often blame themselves when they finally recognize the manipulation. They think, how could I have let this happen? I should have seen it sooner. Trigger 4. Shallow connection syndrome. INFJs crave deep, meaningful connections. They're not interested in small talk about the weather or surface-level friendships where you never really get to know each other. They want to understand what drives you, what you're passionate about, and what keeps you up at night. So when someone consistently keeps things shallow, it feels like rejection to an INFJ. It's like offering someone who's starving a picture of food instead of an actual meal. This doesn't mean you have to bare your soul to every INFJ you meet. However, if you're in a relationship with one and consistently deflect their attempts to go deeper, they will likely feel frustrated and unfulfilled. INFJs often describe this as feeling like they're talking to a wall. They're putting themselves out there, sharing their thoughts and feelings, trying to create a genuine connection, and getting nothing in return. What's particularly hurtful is when someone asks an INFJ personal questions, gets them to open up, and then doesn't reciprocate. It feels like an emotional hit and run. You got what you wanted from them, but you weren't willing to give anything back. Trigger 5. Logic over feelings dismissal. Here's a big one that really gets under an INFJ's skin. Being told that they're too emotional or that they need to think logically rather than feel so deeply. INFJs use a decision-making process that integrates both thinking and feeling. They don't just go with their gut without considering the facts, and they don't just analyze data without considering the human impact. Their feelings aren't irrational impulses. They're sophisticated information processing systems. When someone dismisses an INFJ's emotional perspective as invalid or irrelevant, it's like telling a musician that their ability to hear music doesn't matter. You're essentially invalidating their primary way of understanding and navigating the world. This is particularly damaging in professional settings where INFJs might be told to leave emotions at the door, or just focus on the numbers. For an INFJ, emotions aren't distractions from logic. They're additional data points that provide crucial context. INFJs aren't actually overly emotional. They're emotionally intelligent. When you dismiss this as just feelings, you're missing out on valuable insights. Trigger 6. Interruption and dismissal pattern. INFJs are typically introverted and need time to process their thoughts before speaking. They're not the type to jump into conversations with quick comebacks or immediate responses. When they do speak up, it's usually because they have something meaningful to contribute. So when someone constantly interrupts them or dismisses what they're saying before they finish their thought, it's incredibly frustrating. It's like being asked to perform a piano concerto, but having someone bang on the keys every time you try to play. This is especially problematic in meetings or group discussions where the loudest voices tend to dominate. INFJs often have valuable insights to share, but they require space and time to articulate them effectively. When they're constantly cut off or talked over, they eventually stop trying to contribute altogether. What makes this particularly hurtful is that INFJs typically don't speak up unless they really have something important to say. They're not trying to hear themselves talk or dominate the conversation. When their contributions are dismissed or ignored, it feels like their perspective doesn't matter. Trigger 7. Boundary violation blues. INFJs are clear about their boundaries, even if they express them quietly or indirectly. They might say things like, I need some space to process this, or I'm not comfortable with that, or I prefer to handle this situation differently. When someone consistently ignores or pushes against these boundaries, it feels like a fundamental lack of respect. It's not just about the specific boundary being violated, it's about the message it sends. Your needs and preferences don't matter to me. This is particularly challenging because INFJs often struggle with asserting their boundaries. They might hint at their discomfort or try to redirect the situation rather than making direct demands. When someone doesn't pick up on these signals or worse, deliberately ignores them, the INFJ feels unheard and disrespected. The boundary violations that hit hardest typically involve personal space, emotional privacy, and decision-making autonomy. INFJs need time alone to recharge. They need to feel safe sharing their inner world and have control over their own choices. When these boundaries are consistently crossed, it doesn't just create frustration, it also undermines trust. It makes a fundamental breach of trust that's incredibly difficult to repair. Trigger 8. The perfectionism pressure. Cooker. Most people don't realize this, but many INFJs are already struggling with perfectionist tendencies. They set incredibly high standards for themselves and often feel like they're falling short, even when they're doing better than most people around them. When someone adds external pressure on top of this internal pressure, it can create a psychologically stressful situation. The INFJ feels like they're being squeezed from all sides, their own expectations, those of others, and the fear of disappointing anyone. This is particularly toxic when combined with criticism that focuses on their character rather than their actions. Saying something like, "You always do this wrong," or "You never pay attention to details," hits an INFJ right in their most profound insecurities. INFJs respond much better to specific constructive feedback that focuses on behaviors rather than personality traits. Instead of, "You're so disorganized," try, "I noticed the files weren't sorted the way we discussed. Can we figure out a system that works better for you?" The difference is enormous. One approach attacks their identity, while the other addresses a specific situation that can be improved. Understanding INFJs isn't about walking on eggshells or treating them like fragile flowers. It's about recognizing that they have a unique way of processing and experiencing the world, and that certain behaviors feel particularly threatening to their sense of self. These 8 triggers aren't weaknesses. They're protective mechanisms for some of the rarest and most valuable traits in human personality. When you learn to interact with INFJs in ways that honor their nature, you'll often find that you get back so much more than you give. INFJs are loyal, insightful, creative, and deeply caring. They'll move mountains for the people they care about, offer perspectives you never would have considered, and create relationships of incredible depth and meaning. The key insight here is that INFJs don't need perfect communication or someone who never makes mistakes. They need genuine respect and understanding for who they are. When you can approach them with authenticity instead of performance, respect instead of control, and depth instead of surface-level interaction, you unlock relationships that will enrich both your lives in ways you never imagined. The next time you're interacting with an INFJ, remember what we've talked about today. Choose to see their sensitivity as strength, their need for autonomy as wisdom, and their depth as a gift. Trust me, both of you will be better for it. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.